Thank you everyone for coming, for being here, and for giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit more about this research, which is part of a larger research project that was funded by the UKRI, the ESRC, and then also later received support from the Department of Anthropology. So the work that is now on display in the Atrium Gallery explores what it means to engage with energy transition by listening. The work is the result of a collaboration that involved an artist, Maja Zećo, a curator, Rachel Grant, an urbanist, William Ochoa-Darko, and me, an anthropologist. And we also co-wrote parts of this paper together that I'm giving today. Our collaboration, and now this is not working, our collaboration focused on St Fittick's Park, a large green space on the southern edge of Aberdeen, thank you, in the northeast of Scotland, the UK's hub for the oil and gas industry. St Fittick's Park presents a contested landscape. It's a public park with award-winning biodiversity features, but it is now partially earmarked to become an energy transition zone, which is a flagship project of urban industrial change in Aberdeen. The park is situated by the coast, flanked on the eastern side by the Aberdeen South Harbour, which is a recent extension that was completed only a couple of years ago, and to the north by Tory, a marginalised working class neighbourhood. Tory, as Adrian Crofton, a physician from the Tory medical practice, is keen to point out, is amongst the most disadvantaged areas in Scotland. On the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation map, the area figures in the deep red that designates the most deprived 10%. It's a sharp contrast with the more affluent areas of Aberdeen's leafy West End. Crofton, by the way, is also a supporter of the campaign to protect St Fittick's Park from encroachment by the energy transition zone. And I emphasize all this here right at the start because I want to set a rather complex scene. St Fittick's Park is at the centre of a fraught debate about environmental destruction and dispossession, which has been going on for several years now. Aberdeen concentrates the oil industry and capital that comes with the oil industry, expertise, business capabilities. But with the shift away from fossil fuels towards renewable energy sources, local business elites are now seeking to turn energy transition from a crisis into an opportunity. The Scottish Government has made significant policy support and funding available in order to ensure that Scotland's energy transition will be just. Energy transition is presented as a pathway to a common sustainable future and an economic opportunity. But the lived experience, that's what I'm going to argue here, the lived experience of energy transition is often overlooked. So our collaboration explored the area around St Fittick's Park as a site of both political and sensory friction, interweaving different disciplinary trajectories. So I had studied the dispute around St Fittick's Park and the energy transition zone through intermittent fieldwork between August 21 and September 23. I worked with William Ochoa-Darko, who was a postdoctoral researcher on that project. The study contributed, as I mentioned earlier, to this larger ESRC-funded project on the UK oil and gas sector and how that sector is now disassembling, reassembling its logics and practices in response to diminishing production of oil and gas from the North Sea, climate change and shifting energy and environmental policy in the UK. And Aberdeen and its ambitions to become a post-carbon city became a key focus for us. And through this research, we then met Rachel Grant, the curator, whose practice has been informed by an effort to disrupt normative narratives of extraction and environmental precarity, and has included a very sustained engagement with St Fittick's Park in several of her curated projects. Rachel's work, like William and my research, focused on what local campaigners would describe as an example of unjust transition in the oil industry's heartland. When it came to the energy transition zone, decision makers embroiled in webs of corporate and political influence were seen to have run roughshod over Tory residents to push through a development damaging to St Fittick's Park fragile ecology and to local residents' well-being. And then with funding remaining from the ESRC, partly because of COVID didn't allow us to spend the money quite so quickly, I decided to use the tail end of this Aberdeen research for a collaborative project that would push beyond the conventional qualitative and ethnographic methods that William and I had used in the earlier research. We invited Maja Zećo, a sound and performance artist who's based in Aberdeen. Maja proposed to respond to the increasingly politicized site of St. Fittick's Park with a Soundwalk methodology that is informed by her earlier work on trauma and experiences of place and listening in situ. Hers is a research-based approach that is socially engaged, that is performance-oriented. Maja's practice became the foundation for this collaboration and the exhibition that you can now see in the Atrium Gallery. It centers on a technologically unmediated form of sound walking that is essentially a mode of listening while walking. It seeks to incite change in the sound walker, equipping them with novel or refreshed listening skills so that they can hear and relate to place in new ways. From October 2023, we carried out 4 sound walks and concluded with a workshop with participants in April 2024. Led by Maja, the sound walks explored how people experienced the sounds, the textures, the atmospheres of this particular site. Following a lead-in explaining the sound walking concept and a tune-in with listening exercises guided by Maja, the sound walks then followed a predetermined route, or different routes actually, what Maja refers to as scores, intended to draw participants' attention to sounds of varying intensity, duration, and distance. The materials that are now showcased in the exhibition are based on this collaborative work. They include a body of artistic video and sound work recreated by Maja, as well as large wall hangings that are kind of graphic renderings of a map of St. Fittick's Park and the routes of the sound walks. In addition, there's photographic documentation by a visual artist, Phoebe McBride, as well as ephemera, including some of the notebooks that we had given to Soundwalk participants at the start of each walk to record their experiences and reflections. And again, a quick shout out to LSE Anthropology and LSE Arts and the LSE Engagement and Partnerships Fund who made this exhibition possible. So the project begins from a simple but radical proposition, namely that sound, which is often relegated to the background of everyday experience and our scholarly reflections, is, as Brandon LaBelle writes, intrinsically and unignorably relational. So foregrounding listening becomes a matter of thinking about it as a situated and relational and ethically charged practice. This rejects the visual dominance that shapes public debates and academic research on energy transitions. St. Fittick's Park is an acoustically compelling space. It's home to celebrated wetlands and the East Hollis burn that filters water that comes from a nearby industrial estate. The park sits surrounded by an abandoned landfill. There's a sewage treatment plant, a waste incinerator, and the recently completed Aberdeen South Harbour, where there was once a beach. These overlapping sound sources appear to compete with local wildlife to form a specific kind of sonic density that reflects the layered histories and uncertainties of this landscape. The Soundwalks responded to this by playing with the capacity of sound and movement to engender, evoke, transform, inform, contest, negotiate a sense of place. The objective was to foster curiosity about St. Fittick's oral politics and possibilities. Rather than deploying an additive model of knowledge production, so adding lay perspectives onto academic ones, the Soundwalks were both an artwork and a kind of intervention, an experience that was created from multiple relational dynamics, drawing in our fellow soundwalkers, trees, shrubs, infrastructures, wind and weather, as well as non-human inhabitants of the park, birds, deer, and insects. As researchers, soundwalking required us to lean into indeterminacy. It offered a much more open-ended and incomplete mode of inquiry than the qualitative methods that we had used in our previous research to explore this dispute around St. Fittick's Park. Although that research had been shaped by an anthropological sensibility, a conception of ethnographic fieldwork, which itself leaves a good deal of latitude and flexibility to the fieldworker, there remained a concern to hold the object of our inquiry reasonably still, if you like, to be able to inspect it from different angles and in ever greater depth, right? The soundwalks seem to upend that established methodology. Participants were drawn from a variety of different walks of lives, general public, from Aberdeen and beyond indeed, people whose stories and relationships to St. Fittick's Park we couldn't possibly know in the way that our academic training had taught us was necessary. And so we worried about the context, the commensurability of that data that we got from the soundwalks. Was it data at all, and the data that we had collected previously? How could these mostly one-time encounters actually measure up to the material that we had, that we already had? So, at the same time, something happened as we were soundwalking. We were quietly transforming into fellow listeners, though, fellow explorers of that site, practicing astonishment, practicing a form of wonder. The park that we thought we knew well seemed to change. Alongside the other participants, we rediscovered our own listening. There was a freedom in walking, wondering what might emerge if we relinquished the teleology of social science research as a very, as a narrowly purposeful form of inquiry. Other non-researcher participants similarly spoke of a sense of unknowing, noticing, and hearing anew. The beeps of forklifts, cranes, trucks, and vessels in the harbour, the uniform and incessant hum of the sewage treatment plant, the vrooms and honks of cars passing by, the squawking of seagulls and oyster catchers overhead, and the different calls of blue tits and warblers in the dense shrubs that intersect the park. Who would have thought that there are so many sounds and sonorous things we struggle to name, sounds yet to be named, and names of sounds forgotten? Maja's invitation to us to represent sound in words in the notebooks and the discussions that we had after the walks proved to be a very exciting challenge. Participants joined our walks, as I said, from a variety of backgrounds. There were residents, campaigners, art students, planners, neurodiverse individuals, children, ecologists, and others. While engaging in a highly personal style of acoustic perception, the soundwalks nonetheless compelled people into a shared corporeal practice. The interplay between the shared somatic experience and the deeply personal one is also reflected in the notes that we got from the participants, including these, and I'm just going to read them out. I don't have them on a slide, from a young man who had moved to Tory only recently and joined the first Soundwalk in September 2023. His words captured the relationships that place holes, including fellow soundwalkers, as well as people, encounters, and affects beyond the site. And I'm reading them out now. He writes, "At first, I'm very literal and structured in my note-taking, simply noting down all the noises I can hear. Feet on grass, feet on tarmac, cars, trousers rustling, wood pigeon, wings flap, gulls squawk, distant voices, my pencil, dead leaves sound different, my breathing. I write about 40 things in this style, stopping each time I hear new noise. Sirens. A train screams past. As we go deeper into the park, away from the roads and the city, I notice that I hear more birds. I push my rubber shoes against a silent dandelion stalk and realize how much agency I have to create noise. My mind wanders, I'm hungover, and I've had a falling out with a close friend. I begin to think about how this state of mind is affecting my experience. I wonder if I'm hearing the negative noises louder than the positive ones. These are his inverted comma. I write down that cars, gulls, and industry are negative and that birdsong is positive. I wonder why I've thought this and what makes a sound positive or negative. I write that the gulls scream. They seem violent. I feel shaky and a little scared. Sometimes I check my phone to see if my friend has messaged me. I hear the zip of my jacket pocket very loudly and feel ashamed. We attuned ourselves to what artist and writer Andrea McCartney described as an urban ecotonality of contrasting sounds. We noticed them with surprise, with wonder, sometimes with displeasure. Instead of attaching labels, however, we try to remember to attend to all sounds equally and appreciate noise less as an absence of harmony per se than an index of our own disorientation, unfamiliarity, or lack of words. Milena Drumeva advocates for an approach to soundwalking as a form of witnessing, an ethical practice that carries both privilege and responsibility. As we become attuned to the sonic impacts of social, political, and ecosystem failure. Soundwalking St. Fittick's Park over several months was undoubtedly an exercise in noticing. With each soundwalk, our ears grew more discerning, not just of obvious transformations, but of subtle shifts and differences. We witnessed changes in weather. We heard the sonic agency of the construction site at the harbour diminish as it reached completion, only to be reinvigorated by the operational clanging and banging of unloading vessels and rigs pulled in from the North Sea. What kind of responsibilities come from this? Might it be possible to train our ears and do justice by listening, as Drumeva writes, so that in the future we will be able to identify the audible consequences of the political decisions that, as residents and campaigners anticipate, will likely damage the park? Under Maja's guidance, we co-created a sonic and very visible intervention by walking and searching for, generating, absorbing sound around the park. Rather than framing soundwalkers' experience with the predefined categories emerging from our earlier research, categories of injury, loss, injustice, and environmental harm, we opted for bringing bodies into the park, some of whom had never visited. The Soundwalk rejects a singular epistemic framing, whether that's the epistemics of research or of political action. Participants did not only sense uncomfortable transition, but became part of the site's acoustic ecology. Their footsteps, their breath, murmurs joined the industrial and natural sounds, subtly reshaping the soundscapes that we sought to understand. In sonic terms, soundwalking required both an undisciplining and perhaps a new discipline for the ear, a practice of resistance to the natural order of the senses through which we created worlds within us. Our ears led us. Occasionally, we undisciplined our bodily conduct as we climbed over fences, risked trespassing, and walked past washing lines in the search of sounds. Sounds made soundwalk participants stop, look, retrace steps, or venture off the sonic path curated by Maja. This unexpected undiscipline was both comedic and confounding. We threw each other glances in silence, quite unable to intervene without words. What emerged was messier perhaps than what we originally set out to create. It was a practice that dared to wander, to listen, to deeply engage with people, places, and sounds. It fosters an approach that is undisciplined, querying the dominance of the visual, the textual, the policy-driven in energy transition debates, moving against the academic impulse to stabilize meaning, and beyond that, aligning with anti-colonial ways of knowing by unlearning the senses' modern hierarchies and stressing emergence and relationality. The project's undisciplined ethos ties together artistic experimentation, ethnographic curiosity, and ecological care. It shows how interdisciplinary collaboration can generate new modes of imagining energy futures, once attentive to the audible politics of place, its contradictions, and its fragile possibilities. Thank you.